Okay, I'm going to gavel this in and so we can get started because we're going to start, this is informational, and we're not going to take any votes, so I know Jill's here and I assume other members will trickle in. This is a general government subcommittee. We handle compensation for state employees and state responsible positions, and we've had a lot of exciting times over the last few years. We've set a budget, repealed a budget, put the budget back. And I think at some point you need to step back and say, okay, what did we just accomplish over the last 3.5 years? And where are we, particularly in terms of how competitive are our salaries? What's our vacancy rate look like in terms of staffing? How much of that is ever going to get filled? The workforce has changed dramatically in the last 3.5 years, and I know that as a business owner, fewer people are working. The people that are working may not work as many hours as they did before, and that's just the reality of America today. And so it's a super competitive workforce, labor market, and we have to compete to stay alive, and we also have to be super efficient in the people we do hire. So that's my absolutely unsolicited preamble that you had to listen to, and why don't we go ahead? Yeah, exactly. My prepared remarks, not. Why don't we go ahead, and we're going to start with hearing from Patricia Bishop from Virginia Retirement System. Patricia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you to present the VRS overview for you. When I put together the agenda, I worked with staff. I have provided at the end legislation that pertains to VRS. It's just for your reference. I don't plan to walk through all the slides, mercifully, but there's an appendix there for additional reference. So VRS is a large plan, as you know. We're the 42nd largest in the world, 17th largest in the U.S., and we serve over 778,000 folks. Our fiduciary duty is outlined in the Internal Revenue Code, Code of Virginia, and the Constitution, where we are to act in the best interest of our plan members and beneficiaries. We are tasked with operating the trust fund with the care, skill, prudence, and diligence, while diversifying investments to minimize the risk of large losses. Just by way of information, about 2/3 of our benefits are funded by investment income, so that's why we always spend a good bit of time focusing on that area. And longstanding position of the fund is that limiting the opportunity set for our portfolio could impact our investment performance and be inconsistent with our fiduciary duty. So this just gives you a snapshot on page 6 of the total membership of the plan. We administer 3 tiers of benefits: the Plan 1, Plan 2, and the Hybrid Retirement Plan. The Hybrid Retirement Plan is the plan for new members. About 42% of all active members are now in the Hybrid Retirement Plan. Plan 1 and Plan 2 are generally closed to new members, with the exception of folks who are in the hazardous duty program.
Can you just remind us when Plan 1, Plan 2, and Hybrid, what was the history on that? I was here for it, but it's sort of faded in the midst of time.
Sure. Post the great financial crisis or the recession in 2008, there was sort of a wave of pension reforms that took place across the country.
Okay.
And so what folks did was sort of thought of ways to protect plans in terms of investment and longevity risk, and so
it went from defined benefit to defined contribution.
So, and our hybrid plan pairs both. It still has a defined benefit component,
right,
and a defined contribution.
When did the hybrid plan kick in?
January 1, 2014.
Okay, and Plan 2 was the bridge to that?
That was sort of the bridge, and I think it was 15. What year?
2010.
Oh, 2010. I'm sorry. It was
So
Plan 2.
Plan 2 was the bridge. Plan 1's the original defined benefit plan.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And so I'm often asked sort of how we think about service, how we provide service at VRS. So on slide 7, we use a benchmarking service, cost effectiveness measurement, and they look at service deliveries and cost. We're sort of found in the northwest quadrant, where we provide a higher level of service at a lower cost. We're about 24% below our peers in plan administration costs, so we're efficient in how we deliver the benefits. So just wanted to take a brief look at our investment program. At June 30th, we were $101 billion. And shown here on slide 10 are fiscal year returns each year since 1990. We're a long-term investor. Our long-term assumed rate of return is 6.75%, which is fairly conservative compared to other states, and that's a good thing. And our last fiscal year return in fiscal year 2022 was 0.6%. And just wanted to take a look on the next slide, 11, of how that compares to a sample of other plans. And you'll see us on the top line at 0.6% for the 1-year period. And really, that made us somewhat unique. Most plans did not have a positive return. For example, North Carolina was a negative 7.3%. And if you look across this whole table, VRS returns outperformed all of the other plans listed here across all time periods, with the exception of one, which was in the 5-year period where Texas ERS did a little bit better.
Now, is this adjusted for inflation, or is this just?
Those are just the net returns per year.
Okay, so, okay.
So they're the annualized net returns. Another, on the next page 12, you'll see that.
On page 12.
Thank you. We use the Trust Universe Comparison Service, or TUX, for investments. And this really compares risk, which is your x-axis, and return, the y-axis. And so here again, we're in that desirable northwest quadrant where we're providing greater returns at a lower level of risk. So I'll turn now to funded status and contribution rates. Funded status, I think, as this group knows, is the ratio of assets available to pay benefits compared to the plan's liabilities. As of June 30th, the state plan's funded status was 81.3%. Good news is that it is improved about 5% over the last 5 years. But importantly, about $5.2 billion on a market value in unfunded liabilities remain in the state plan. If we look at the teacher plan, this graph shows the funded status for it. On a market value as of June 30th, it was 81.1% funded. And again, over the last 5 years, we have seen improvement in the funded status. It was about 7.5% improvement. But again, there's $10 billion in liabilities remain. So we really closely continue to monitor the plans and try to work to avoid adding additional unfunded liabilities there. I'm often asked on slide 16 how we compare to other plans with respect to our funded status. And so this shows various funded status of plans, and this is FY 2021, which is the most recent data available for all the states that are included here. Our funded status, and as well as the discount rate, which is that long-term assumed rate of return. And so we were 88.7% funded using a 6.75% return. And so you'll say, well, there's a bunch of states that are above VRS, but you'll also notice that nearly all of them, with the exception of South Dakota, were using a higher discount rate. So if we normalized or applied the same discount rate of 6.75 across all the plans, we would move up considerably and be in a higher position on that table. So just wanted to highlight on the next page, 17, two really important actions that took place during last session. The first was supporting contribution rates and maintaining those higher contribution rates for the biennium. And so they would have been lower because of the exceptional returns in fiscal year 2021, but you maintain those higher rates. And so infusing those additional dollars into the fund provided additional $345 million into the teacher plan, for example, which we expect to generate approximately $500 million in savings over the next 15 years. For the state plan, we expect a savings of approximately $48 million over the next 15 years. So that infusion of those dollars is really helpful to the health of the plans. The second action, and we're extremely gratified that the General Assembly and Governor took this action to allocate up to $1 billion in additional payments to the plans. They'll generate future savings and reduce future costs and also help plan funding. $750 million was received in June 2022, and another $250 million are scheduled to be paid in 2023. And again, this will really create some additional savings for the plans. In addition to those, there's also $80.4 million for the state health insurance credit plan. It's only currently funded at 21.8%, and so additional funds are planned to be infused into that, which could save about $99 million over the next 20 years. So I'll turn now to the topic of return to work. Senator Peterson, you talked about the workforce and workforce needs sort of changing. And so return to work provisions allow retirees to return to work with a VRS employer while still collecting their pension. So there are three current options that are available. One, they can return to work on a part-time basis, basically 80% of a full-time schedule after a 30 day break in service. There are also provisions specific to teachers, school bus drivers, and school security officers where they can return to work on a full-time basis, but their break-in service is one full year.
So they can return to work and still draw their pension?
Correct.
Okay.
But they have to be gone for a year.
They have to be gone for a year first. And then the third way is that they can return to work, but then their pension stops and there's no break-in service required. And that's just a normal person. You come, you stop your retirement benefit, you return to work, and then we would recalculate the benefit after. So they become an active employee.
Just like they go back and
they start
back to the status quo ex ante.
Yes, and then they would just build upon their benefit.
Okay.
And so when we talk about, on slide 21, when we talk about returning to work, there's several things to keep in mind. The IRS requires that you demonstrate that employment has terminated, and there must be no written or verbal prearrangement. And there also must be a bona fide break in service. Again, retirees can return to work after the 30-day break in service in a part-time capacity. So since there's been a lot of interest in return to work, the General Assembly tasked us with looking at return to work and developing a report. Mike was kind enough to be briefed by our team about the contents of that report. But I think it's important to kind of think about that our return to work provisions were really set out in 2001 when the teacher critical shortage first started. JLARC worked on that as well with actuaries and benefits counsel to make sure that what was developed was consistent with IRS guidance and would not actuarially harm the plans. But what we found in doing this report was that the current statutory provisions, they generally align with most other plans. There are some areas where we provide more flexibility, like the part-time work, but there are shorter breaks in service in other states, but often they use other provisions paired with them, like income and hour limitations or stoppage of the benefit. So, when we think about these on 23, we are a qualified plan under the Internal Revenue Code. That means that our investment earnings are exempt from taxation, and also our member contributions are pre-tax. So that's important, why we really focus on ensuring that we remain a qualified plan. And so when we allow folks to return to work full-time, there can be actuarial consequences if they don't have a long break in service, because it encourages them to retire earlier than expected. Then we pay out benefits sooner and for a longer period. And then importantly, we don't have the time to invest those contributions to pay those benefits. And so those are some of the impacts with return to work.
So let me see if I can summarize this.
Yeah.
What we want to avoid is people sort of artificially retiring, then drawing, and then intentionally going back to work. In other words, and would that financially benefit them? At that point, can they double dip?
Yes.
Okay, so we want to avoid the double dip.
Right, and they can now, for teachers, bus drivers, and school security officers after a 1-year break in service.
Right.
But the break in service, and I think you made the point, is that you're not incentivizing them
Right.
to retire earlier than they otherwise would. So when we looked at this in the report, we understand that folks need some flexibility because of the challenges they're facing. And so if you used a 6-month break versus a 12-month, we don't think that it would have significant actuarial impacts. But it still would comply with Internal Revenue Code. But, optimally, Benefits Council has opined that
Right.
12 months is probably the optimal. But since we're facing different challenges, 6 months would likely have the same impact. So you don't want people to just be in their seat, retire, draw their benefit, and then continue working the next day.
And I've seen this happen, and I have a very good friend I grew up with who was an elementary school principal, had a career, retired, worked for his brother-in-law as like a bookkeeper, came back, and now he's working in a different school system. But basically came back to work.
Yes. And that can happen if he comes back to the school system full-time. If it's within the VRS system, then the benefit has to stop presently, unless he's in a critical shortage position.
He may be.
And right now, nearly all teacher
Critical.
positions are designated
Right.
as critical shortage. So there is, DOE sets what the critical shortage positions are, and nearly every K through 12 would be included.
Good question.
Sure.
When you said other states have a shorter time frame, what does that time frame look like in other states? Because are we incentivizing somebody then to go to another state who might be thinking about mid-career? Like, I could go to a different state,
Sure.
retire for 6 months. I mean, obviously not a lot of people are
Right.
going to do that, but what are other states doing?
There's some states are at 6. There are states, for example, like Ohio. Some folks think that Ohio has no break in service, but in fact, it's 2 months because they stop your benefit for 2 months. So in essence, it's really a 2-month
But it's
break in
barely
service.
a break. So are they taking a huge hit? What do their actuaries seem to?
They seem to, on Ohio, I don't have it off the top of my head, and we can follow up. Their challenge is they add additional provisions along with the break in service. I think they have an income provision. Is that right, David? Maybe. We'll follow up.
Let me ask you another question.
Go ahead.
Is it clear, Mr. Chair, sorry, is it clear that, is it having an impact on people retiring sooner than they would otherwise? I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
is this having a significant impact, people retiring and then coming back into the system,
Yeah,
it
I
would
think
certainly
It
seem
will
to.
when you have short breaks. The longer the period, the less the impact, because the person has to forego income. But for example, for 2 and 3 month breaks in service, some folks will have a lot of leave stored up, and so their income stream really remains the same. So for them, they could say, well, I'll stay out for 3 months and I could come back. So that's why 6 months is sort of the sweet spot from the pension plan.
So the break in
perspective.
service can actually be a point of time when they're out, still getting paid because of leave?
Well, they would have had leave. They wouldn't be. They would have separated service, but they'd have that lump sum to
All right.
live on.
Okay,
in,
got it.
in general.
All right, any other questions about return to work? Okay, proceed.
Okay. We did have a third option in the report that I should have noted. Oops, let me go back. In that the Internal Revenue Code does allow at a specified age folks to retire with no break in service. And so these are folks who we would consider normal retirement age, which is 65 for Plan 1, or Social Security normal retirement age for Plan 2 and hybrid. And so for those folks, we would expect them to essentially be retiring anyway, so it doesn't necessarily impact the plans. You might lose some gains because they've not stayed actively employed as long, but you wouldn't necessarily change retirement patterns, and that's what we try to avoid. Okay, the next topic area, just touch upon, we provided a brief a briefing to you back in the fall regarding judicial retirement system and the working group that we had to look at provisions for judges. And so, and I think one of the things we noted at that was that the judges do have a 78% cap, and that the Internal Revenue Code says no one can get more than 100%. And so what the working group, which was the Office of the Executive Secretary, VRS, and Senate Finance staff, Adam and then Mike worked with us on it, was trying to look at ways to help, in particular, folks who were age 55 and over being originally appointed to the bench, because in the hybrid plan, they won't have as much time to earn those benefits in the defined contribution component because they're starting later. And so there were two options that we discussed in that working group. One was increasing the matching contributions in the hybrid, and this would apply to everyone, so everyone would get 100% regardless of what their what elective contributions they made. And then there's no additional unfunded liability that's created or longevity or investment risk. And that would be about $1 million to do that. Alternatively, you could increase the benefit multiplier or increase the service weighting, which would essentially yield the same thing. But this would affect the defined benefit plan and create some additional liabilities. And so this slide just kind of gives the three options where if you moved them all back to Plan 2, the cost would be about $6 million. If you moved them into the matching contributions, it's about $1 million, and it's about 1.6 if you change the service or the multiplier. So I'll just wrap up here. There's some summary information on the next two slides. We have to administer the trust solely in the interest of our members and beneficiaries. We've made some progress with the additional contributions and efforts that you have made, and we are gratified by those on behalf of our members and beneficiaries. We understand there needs to be some flexibility with return to work, but we're also trying to balance that with protecting the fund. And as we think about this session, there are always bills to change or enhance benefits, but when we do so, just keeping in mind that unfunded liabilities already exist, and we would be adding to those.
Can I just go
Sure.
back briefly to the judicial retirement? And,
Sure.
there was Senator McDougal had a bill on that last year, and we agreed to study it. And I think, and I've talked to circuit court judges in my area, without getting into the compensation, it was always historically one of the benefits of being a judge. Later in your career, you walk away from a significant income, but you get this ability to kind of walk into the state pension plan, and you want to accelerate the vesting, because typically the man or woman, when they leave their practice, could be in their 40s or 50s. What are some of the options in terms, because we've kind of walked back from that, which makes it harder, let's say you're 55, to walk away from a practice to become a judge. What are some of our options to kind of get back to the more accelerated match?
Yeah, so that's what, so the first option, and I'll put it here, one of the things you could do is change well, I'll do the second one first. You
Right.
could do it just in the defined benefit component of
Right.
the hybrid. You could move them all back into Plan 2, but that would be a pretty big
All right, well, let's
lift.
leave that out.
So we'll leave that one out.
Right.
But so if you change the multiplier from 1 to 1.1%, or you increase that weighting,
Right.
because for every year they get 2.5 times if you're 55 and
Right,
over.
right.
So you could increase the weighting from 2.5 to 2.75, would be about $1 million to do either one of those.
And that would come out of VRS?
Yes, and so we'd have to collect contributions to do that,
Okay.
to fund that. The other option is that you would basically give them more employer money into their defined contribution component of their plan. And so the theory there is they'd get that money in. You
And
can
then
do this for all judges, not just those
They put it in the
55 and
plan.
over. They put it, then they invest it, and then
So it could
their
be like
income-
a one-time bonus of, say, 50,000 or something like that?
You would give it to them each payroll cycle. You would
Okay.
continue to give them those dollars, and so you would increase those employer matching dollars for them. And so at the end, instead of their income replacement ratio being less because they're in the hybrid retirement plan, that would theoretically increase, dependent upon market conditions. For that.
Okay.
And in the back, I think on slide maybe 52, and I don't know how to get to 52 from here, but if you look on your pages, you can see that it does what the income replacement ratios would be. And so basically, Plan 1 and Plan 2 have higher income replacement ratios, and that's what they'd get in retirement compared to what they were getting as an active
The
employee.
hybrid's significantly less.
Right, but then if you see on the right-hand side is if you move those folks and increase the match, you're getting them closer to Plan 1 and Plan
Okay.
2.
That's helpful.
I hope that helps.
All right, that's excellent. That was almost exactly 30 minutes. Any questions for VRS?
And
Okay.
I'll follow up with Senator Vogel on the Ohio information. for sure.
Okay, wonderful. All right. That was very, very good. Next, we have an update on state staffing levels from DHRM. Janet Lawson,
Good morning.
thank you for being here.
Thank you for this opportunity. Good morning, Chairman Peterson and esteemed members of the committee. I'm honored to be here this morning to present an update on our state workforce. So our first slide is a composition of the workforce broken down by branch of government. So you'll notice that the executive branch, of course, has the highest percentage. And I did not put percentages on the chart, but just over 94% of all employees are in the executive branch. The red indicates those that are all other, and the blue is education, so there are more executive branch employees in education. And then legislative branch has just under 1%, judicial branch has 3.5%, and independent agencies represent 1.5%. The total of 139,344 people really is comprised of our salaried employees and our wage employees. And a breakdown for at least the executive branch, 85% are salaried and 15% are wage. And of course, our classified employees, the 55,588, represents those that are covered by the Virginia Personnel Act and are the basis for the majority of the reporting that you see come out of our office.
Okay.
So the next slide shows the composition of veterans in our classified workforce. And veteran recruiting and retention is extremely important to us as well as to the administration. And for the past 10 years, we've been tracking the employees in our composition that are veterans that have identified themselves as veterans. It's a voluntary option. But we have implemented additional policies, specifically with recruitment, to help attract veterans to our workforce. Recently, as of January 10th, we actually amended our annual leave policy to where an active duty or retired service person would actually receive annual leave credit based on their service in the military or National Guard or Reserves. So someone who had 15 years when they came to join the state would start at the 15-year accrual level for annual leave. And they also have preferential hiring processes in place. So on the chart, if you can read it, currently our composition of veterans in the workforce is 6.83% for fiscal year 22. We do believe that the primary reason for the decrease over the years has been competition with the private sector. It's a little hard to compete with Amazon and Dominion Energy when their salaries are significantly higher than ours. But they are still something that we pay close attention to. When we have positions that are open, we specifically look for opportunities to partner with our veteran business partners. And we are also a member of the V3, the Virginia Values Veterans Program, and working with them on ways we can also encourage veterans to come to the state. Our turnover has continued to remain higher than most public sector standards. This past fiscal year, we did see our turnover rate drop a little from the previous fiscal year, which is a good thing. We ended the year at 13.9%, which is down from 15.6% from the prior year. However, public sector standards are typically 8 to 12%. So we are still at a higher level than we would prefer. And we do have some positions that are significantly higher. Security management, law enforcement, direct care and nursing staff, and administrative and office staff have a turnover rate between 17 and 40%. We do have an exit survey process through Mercer. It is a voluntary service that we do encourage those who leave state service to complete, but without having an accurate date pool to say exactly why people are leaving. It's difficult to dictate that. And this data is available to each agency. So agencies that have 5 or more employees who have completed a survey can look at their own data to determine why their employees are leaving their agency. So the next slide shows our employee demographics. This is all as of the end of November. Average age, but basically most of the data has remained unchanged for the past 5 years. The 2 exceptions would be our average years of service has decreased from 11.2 years to 10.7 years. And the average salary has increased from last year at the average of $57,408 to this year of $61,934. Compensation. I heard you speak earlier this morning as far as compensation being one of the hot topics that we all pay very close attention to. This is a tool that we use for recruitment and retention. We've had numerous studies over the years. I believe the last study completed by Deloitte in 2021 actually demonstrated some areas that needed some targeted increases, which were implemented last year. And so we note that we still have areas that we lag the market. Because of the state minimum wage increase over the last 2 years, we have noticed that pay bands 1 and 2 have created compression. Every time we have a pay raise or pay increase, we increase our pay bands. But pay bands 1 through 4, with their increase, we've noticed more and more compression throughout.
When you say compression, can you define what that means?
So compression would be if you have an employee who, let me see an example. I'll use administrative assistant. We have an administrative assistant who's been with us for 5 years and earns $40,000.
Right.
Their supervisor earns $50,000, but we have an increase based on minimum wage. The lower salaries will increase, but the higher salaries may not.
So they close in on each other?
They do,
Okay.
yes. And over years, when we've had increases to state salaries, our pay scale will increase by the exact same amount. So
Right.
someone who is hired at the minimum, who never moves positions, potentially could remain at the minimum of their pay band unless they've had other opportunities to receive either in-band adjustments or they've competed for a new position and received an increase in pay.
Okay.
Our agency has recently initiated a plan to evaluate our job architecture to see if there's more best-in-class opportunities for us to redesign our job architecture and our compensation plans. The next slide is an update on telework. Back in October, I believe I presented to the full Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee. I know telework is still an area of interest. We have not pulled any new data since that time, but I wanted just to provide an update basically of where we were back in October. So at that time, we had 42% of our classified positions were deemed eligible to telework. This was up from 26% in 2019. Also, as of October of last year, 66% of our classified employees in an approved or in an eligible position were approved to telework, anywhere from 1 to 5 days. And these numbers exceed the legislative goal of 20% of employees in eligible positions being approved to telework. That was established in Section 2.2-2817 of the Code of Virginia.
Okay. So let me just interpret this. So of your 55,588 classified employees, 42% are eligible to telework.
Yes.
Now, how many of them are actually taking advantage of that, or
That would be 66% of those.
60? Okay, so basically 15,000.
Yes, 15,338.
And when you say they telework every day or half the week, or?
It's mostly, so also on the chart, it's anywhere from 1 to 5 days.
Right.
The majority being 1 day a week, 32%, followed closely by 2 days a week at 21%.
Okay. And when they're teleworking, who monitors, like, whether they're working or not working or working on another job, or how? I mean, I own my own business, and these are real-world issues.
That should be their supervisor. Their supervisor should be ensuring that they are working effectively from home when they are teleworking. If they're a project person, they should be able to demonstrate that they are making progress on their project. If they have team meetings and they're holding them virtually, they're still participating in those meetings, but it is a management issue.
Okay.
It's a difficult one, too.
Believe me.
Can I ask a question about compression? We heard so often from law enforcement about how much compression was an issue and they thought contributed to high attrition rates. And we have some positions that have such high attrition rates in our workforce in the Commonwealth. Can you speak to that, how much you think a compression is affecting that in terms of attrition? Because I know it obviously would impact morale. If you've been there a really long time and people are coming in and they're making more than you are,
Yes.
that would make me want to leave. So let me ask you just to speak to that.
Good question.
My understanding is that a lot of the targeted increases that were implemented last July, were specific to law enforcement, I believe corrections, administrative positions, those that we saw the higher turnover and the difficulty in recruiting. We'd heard from state police that they had a lot of vacancies that they were having difficulty recruiting for. You'll hear from the superintendent that their graduating classes are significantly smaller than they used to be because it's just difficult for them to attract new candidates.
This is state police.
This is state police,
Okay.
yes. So I believe that it is an issue. I believe the targeted increases that were implemented last year were to assist in addressing the compression in those positions. We know that there are other positions that need to be reviewed. It's just taking a bite at a time.
Yeah, and then outside law enforcement, I guess my question would be, do you have a sense about just across government in general? Because obviously we want to recruit really competent people to work in government because competent people make good decisions and help with, conserving our resources and using them wisely. And so I wonder about that impact that, again, the high attrition rate, we lose our best people. And what it is that if you can't make a recommendation at some point to us about things that we can be doing to address compression in those other agencies, because we've focused on law enforcement a lot, but I don't know that we've ever really focused on it in other agencies.
I'd have to look at the review that was completed by Deloitte in 21. I wasn't here at that time to see what other positions were reviewed. And as I mentioned, perhaps bringing, whether it's Deloitte or another firm in, to look at the other positions. We know that statewide there are some positions that are compensated appropriately, and we know others are not. We know that there are some areas that have pockets of compression and others that don't. Each agency is able to manage their own compensation within the pay structure, especially within the executive branch. The non-executive branch agencies have a lot more flexibility. But I think we need to have that time to look to see where our biggest areas of concern are. And I think it's a combination of not just what we see on the screen, but also what we're hearing from, turnover rates and morale and things of that nature. Difficult to recruit positions. You're welcome. And I can follow up with you as well once I talk to staff. So the next slide, there we go. So benefits is also an area that is important to us in attracting and retaining staff. Our health benefits plan for the current fiscal year, we saw no premium increase. We saw no plan design changes for the current fiscal year. For the next fiscal year in 24, we do anticipate a modest increase of 4% at this time, and that's just to ensure that we are able to continue supporting the increase in claims. We do continually look at our programs, whether it's our pharmacy, our rebates through our providers, to ensure that we are receiving the best rebates possible, and also being able to pass those on to our employees. And my final slide is really an update on our HR systems. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the HR systems that we use at DHRM. We had an implementation of a new human capital management program called Cardinal HCM. This was actually implemented, I believe, back in the initiation was in 2018. We just completed implementation this past October. There were 3 phases of rolling out this new system. And this was taking us from our legacy system that had been in place since the late 70s to a more current system where we have easier access to data. So the rollout included 233 agencies, 363 localities, because we also include our benefits programs through the system. So the system includes a total of 228,000 plus active employees. It does not house historical data, unfortunately, so we still are relying on our legacy system to pull historical data. This will continue until at least October of next year. So, for example, the data that we pulled for our current workforce was pulled from a variety of sources. But we are excited to finally be in one system going forward. The other new system that we are implementing and going live January 24th is our new recruitment management system, PageUp. We were using People Admin. However, we found more recently that we needed something more user-friendly, not only for our agencies but for our applicants, as well as a system that provided more robust reporting. And PageUp will accomplish those for everyone who uses the system. And there's also potential functionality with PageUp that we could potentially look at in the future. Things
So
like
it's like a payroll, how does you account for your time? I mean, what does it do?
recruitment management. So
What does that mean?
someone wants to apply for a job with the state.
Okay,
They go to the Virginia Jobs website. They say, yes, I want to apply for this position. They complete an application online, and that goes to the agency that is recruiting. And so that is our recruitment management system. And so supervisors will have access to every applicant within their, under their supervision. So if they have 5 positions open, they can pull at any time to see how many people have applied, screen the applications to see who's qualified, who's not, who they may want to interview.
okay. All righty, those are all your slides.
Yes, they are my
Okay, I got some
slides.
questions, but any questions from the panel?
You've been so thorough.
Okay, I have a couple questions, and the one is, when we were at the Senate Finance Retreat, we talked about vacancy rate.
Okay.
And, how many positions were unfilled, and it was a fairly high number. I mean, I've been thinking it was as high as 17%. Do you know what our current vacancy rate is for our state staffing? And then I've got some follow-up questions.
I don't, only because not every agency uses our recruitment management system. But we can ask agencies to share their data with us, and I can follow up with you. I've heard numbers similar to the 17%.
Right.
But to me, they're estimates. So if you don't mind me doing some research and following up, I would prefer.
No, I don't, and that brings me to my next question, which is the whole issue of telework. And, for about 2 years, we had a wrestling match with agencies trying to figure out who was coming to work, who was teleworking, and they didn't want to share the data. And so that's one of the other questions I have. Of the agencies that we have, which ones rely more on telework as opposed to, let's say, Department of Corrections, where let's hope they're coming into work. I mean, that might be a problem.
Yes.
So that would be helpful also.
I am happy to share with you the report that we provided to the administration that breaks down by agency and secretariat, if that would be helpful.
Okay. And then, this is not a question, but more of a general comment, and I sort of alluded to this at the beginning. Our workforce participation rate in Virginia has plunged in the last decade.
Yeah.
And what that means is that there's fewer workers chasing all the same work that was out there 10 years ago. And I go through this as an employer, and my clients do, we all do, which means that a lot of these vacancies may never get filled. And what we need to find are people, I guess we need to ask more for people, but we need to pay them more. And in some ways, the whole model of working has changed in the sense that we have to be able to recruit people, bring them in, but then we have to be holding them accountable. We can't afford to have people just sitting around, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. And that's one of my concerns with telework is people aren't getting instructed what to do. They don't do anything. And you have someone that's on your payroll that's not actually adding to the experience of the consumer. So just some things to think about. We got a lot to tackle, and we're not going to do it in the next few weeks, but we're going to try. Great. Any other questions for DHRM? Okay, so that was good. So VRS and DHRM, two huge, huge topics. And what do we have up next week? That's it for today, right?
That's it for today.
Okay,
Next week, we're going to go over the introduced budget.
okay,
We're going to hear from the Chief Transformation Officer.
okay.
And we're also going to hear from Chief Transformation and then Chief Procurement Officer.
Okay, I also want to put a bug in your ear, district court clerks. We had a presentation on that 3 years ago, and that is a huge problem in our courthouses. And so I have a budget amendment in on that, but it would be helpful to get some comparative statistics on district court clerks. Anybody else have a topic they want to suggest from the panel while we got staff here? Okay, well, let us know. All right, gang, we're adjourned. Yep.